Доброе утро, дорогие друзья.
Good morning, dear friends. My name is Angelina Davidova, and I'm moderator of today's webinar, which is called European Green Deal and Recovery Plan. What does it all mean for Russia and a reference for Russia? I'm pleased to see the speakers and the guests of our webinar. Please write it down in the chat if you can hear me and see me. This is a request for all the attendees, for all the participants, not the speakers. I see that the messages are coming in, that you can hear and see me well. If at any moment there is a technical difficulty, a glitch, please write it down in the chat and our tech support will help you. So, welcome. Thank you for your responses. I'm pleased to welcome you here at the webinar, European Green Deal and Recovery Plan and the reference for Russia. It is organized by EU mission in Russia, delegation in Russia, and the European-Russian Partnership for the Preservation of Climate. The European Green Deal was announced by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. So the goal was to become energy neutral by the year 2050. But of course, we all know about the current crisis, and all the countries, European countries and Russia, have to take urgent measures to overcome the difficulties. So, given the current situation, what will be the situation? The nearing numbers and trading partners, European Union and Russia, have to closely coordinate their efforts in their transition to lower carbon economy. So we are going to discuss the core aspects of the Green Deal and the main principles and approaches to the recovery plan and their relevance for Russia. So what are the challenges in the trading relations? Also, can the plans for the economic recovery and preservation of climate can complement each other and help each other? So what are particular companies in European Union and in Russia are doing in this respect? And of course, the challenges of the Russian companies and European companies operating in Russia. Now, small technical details. We have simultaneous translation, and we will use two languages, Russian and English. I will explain to you how to use the simultaneous translation function in the Zoom. If you use your computer for the Zoom, there is a small sign of a globe in the lower part of the Zoom screen. If you press this globe, there will be two options, English and Russian. If you are planning to listen to the webinar in the Russian language, please choose Russian and tick it. Use the Russian flag. If you need translation from English into Russian, it is important not to turn off the original original channel. Otherwise, you will not be able to hear the speakers using Russian. So if you need a translation from English into Russian, choose Russian. And do not switch the original channel of Russian. If you use a mobile device for joining us, then you will find this translation function. There are three dots also in the lower part of the screen. And you can use the simultaneous translation function there. So please update your Zoom to the latest version or write it in the chat if you have any questions. We will try to help you on the way in the process of the broadcast.
Сейчас я надеюсь, что все
Now, hopefully, you could figure out how this function works. And we start our workshop, our webinar. And I would like to give the floor to Oleshka Sibic, Deputy Head of EU Delegation to Russia. You are welcome.
Thank you very much. I sincerely hope you can all hear me. That's always the first obligatory question for any webinar. I just wanted to welcome you all, because we will have many other much more expertise voice saying much more let's say smarter things about the climate change as such. But we as the EU delegation in Russia wanted to explain why we are so interested in organizing this event together with our colleagues in the European Commission Directorate for Climate Action. First of all, we are now have found ourselves in this COVID-19 time, and I'm sure that many of you or some of you were aware that we wanted to organize a big EU-Russia climate conference in 16-17 March, and then we had it all ready, and just 1 week before we were caught in this unpredictability of the COVID-19, and we thought we should not bring together 1,000 people at that particular time. We still hope that that will be possible to organize, but at the same time, we have to still deal with the consequences. We have to start discussing the climate change and the recession and all these other elements. When I was thinking about what to say as a welcome, I was given this little cartoon. I don't know if you've seen it in The Economist, where it's a symbol of Earth, and then it's with a wave, like tsunami type of wave that says COVID-19, and everybody is washing their hands vigorously. And then just one slightly bigger wave behind it is the recession. And then there is this looming huge wave behind both these waves that is the climate change. The reason why I'm saying this and why I thought this cartoon was so illustrationally is that we cannot just set a priority and say everything else will wait. We have to tackle the climate change now, and we have to tackle it together. And that's why we are very happy to be able to host this webinar, to be able to discuss these topics with many aspects of the society of the Russian Federation as well as European Union. This is not only the thing for the youth, this is not only the element for the policymakers, it is for policymakers, but it's also for businesses, for NGOs, for civil society, to increase an understanding that that is a potential looming danger and to do something about it. There is, of course, one thing that I wanted to say is that the Commission, and maybe also Clara that is speaking afterwards will address that, when we are now talking about the COVID and tackling the consequences of the recession and in investing money, the European Commission has been quite generous in the recovery plan, and we are talking about 1.85 trillion euros that has been invested for the recovery in the EU member states. What I want to add here is that the big part or an important part of this recovery plan is in fact also environmentally friendly one. What we want is a green recovery. And that's why a number of investments here are about sustainable and smart transports. It's about energy efficiency in buildings and renewable energy. So that's where the big part of this funding is also coming from. European Commission, as you all know, so I'm not telling you anything new of saying that the Green Deal was a big topic for the European Commission when it was entering its mandate, and it's continuing right now. It has set a very ambitious, but we believe also achievable goal of reaching the climate neutrality by 2050. And while it seems so far in the future, I just was reminded the 90s were 30 years ago, and I still remember very well the 90s, and the difference between then and 2050 is exactly the same. So it's coming, and that's why we hope that this will happen. I would not mention all the speakers. I'm very grateful as the EU delegation that we have this wide variety of speakers from as I said, to businesses, from the Russian and European ones, because we think that this is a common issue. And one element that I want to specify here, as said, there will be other speakers who will be speaking much more competently about how we can tackle the problem. But I would like to flag the issue of the Arctic. And that's why we in the EU delegation are also very interested in this topic and in this discussion. It's one of the most vulnerable areas for climate change. We all know it. The climate warming has been 2.5 times faster in Russia than in the rest of the world, but it was in the last 40 years, but in Russian Arctic, it was 4.5 times faster. We are seeing forests burning at the highest lands are being burned because of the fires. There was this fuel storage tank that has exploded or collapsed near the Norilsk that we were following in the last 2 weeks. And it says that it's because of the thawing of the permafrost. So we all together have to, because Arctic is our common ocean, not only European and Russian, but it's the world ocean. And it's one of those very crucial elements. And I think we have to continue talking about it together. And I think that's the intention of this particular webinar. And I really wish all of us a good discussion. Thank you to all the speakers, to all the participants for being here and for speaking to us about it. Back to you, Angelina.
Госпожа Симчик, спасибо большое.
Madam Simkic, thank you very much for your introduction. Dear friends, among the technical things, I would like to tell you how we will work, and also I will tell you how you can ask questions and make comments on what the people are saying. We will have speakers followed one another, and after each of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask your questions, and we will try to answer these questions, and then we will move to the next speaker. After all the experts have done their presentations, we will have an open discussions, and you will be able to ask your questions again. So what is the best way to write your questions? In the lower part of the screen, you have icon chat. Please do not write your questions in the chat. There is a special function called questions and answers, Q&A. If you do not see this small Q&A function, please write to us in the chat. So in this questions and answers, you can ask your questions. But if you already see a question that you would like to support or make a comment, you can vote in favor of a particular question. If you put your small plus, if you support this question, if it's of interest for you. I see we have a lot of participants, almost 300. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all the questions, but we will try to answer the questions that are supported by most of you. Now, by default, a chat is for sending messages to the speakers. If you write something in the chat, this comes to me as a moderator, and the people will see your comments. So, if you have a question, subject question to the speaker, or if you want to support any other question, please use questions and answers. For chat, it's just urgent thing, especially technical matter. Now I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Deputy Director General at Climate Action, EU Commission, Madam Clara de la Torre. She will tell us about all those topics that are very hot. They are on the front pages of the media, and they're of great interest for participants of our webinar and the populations of Europe and Russia. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Special thanks to our colleagues in the European Union delegation in Russia for organizing this webinar. Special thanks as well to the other speakers, and not least to everyone that is following us from their places, their own places. As it has been said, we were planning to have this conference in Moscow. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that, but we are grateful that to technology precisely, which is allowing us do that in this time. And I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to hold the conference in Moscow. Our colleague in the EU delegation, Alexa, has told us, and it's good that we remind ourselves, is that we have a horrible crisis, COVID-19, and as and it has the different waves behind. And as our president, Mrs. van der Leyen, has said several times, there will be a vaccine for COVID. But unfortunately, there will be no vaccine for climate change. Therefore, we are at a crucial moment where we have to take decisions on how our future is. And with that, I would like to go now to the second slide to remind us of one of our biggest strengths in all those of us that are working in the second slide, please. That are working in climate change. We have a policy which is we are lucky because we have a strong and clear science base. Science has shown us that there is anthropogenic warming, that the temperature of the world has been increasing due to human action. And already let us remind ourselves that since the pre-industrial era, we have already warmed our climate by our temperature by 1 degree. If we want to observe, and I'm sure to honor our commitments in Paris, we don't have much time, as we are going to reach, if we don't do anything, more than the 1.5 degrees stated. So we need to act. There is time, but there is little time, so we can still act, and let us act together. If we go to the third slide, we will see. We will concentrate. There is one message I would like that we take out of this slide, is that in the European Union we have proved that not only it's possible, but it's also profitable to diminish the greenhouse gas emissions. Because while we have diminished them since the 90s by 23%, our economy has grown by 61%. So it is possible and it is profitable. And this conclusion does not change with the COVID pandemic. You know that the European Union has pioneered carbon pricing for more than 15 years, and we have the emissions traded system, and we have covered, which is covering 40% of emissions and more than 1,000 plants. So we are there, and we would like to continue passing this message. It is possible and profitable to decouple economic growth from emissions. If we go to the next slide, let us remind ourselves that in the European Union, we are also proud to have a legal framework, a legally binding framework to address the climate change and to address, therefore, our climate ambition. We have increased our share of renewables. We have reached 20% this year, and we are aiming at reaching 32% in 2030. Energy efficiency, it's very important, and we have an improvement of 20% goal for this year, and we have reinforced this to 32.5%. So it's we are a living example of how decarbonization works, with more renewables, with energy efficiency, and with the introduction of a number of disrupting technologies. It is on that basis that when we go to the next slide, we address the EU Green Deal. And as Alexa has said, the Green Deal has been in the forefront from the beginning of this mandate of this Commission, and still is, because even if it was already designed as the European Union growth strategy, and now following or in the middle of the pandemic, hopefully going towards the end, it is even more the case. It is our growth strategy that we would like to still put in place to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Because our analysis have proven that if we don't reach climate neutrality very soon, and I'll come back to that, we will not make it. So the Green Deal is the growth strategy and the roadmap behind that, supporting the goal of achieving not the energy neutrality, but the carbon neutrality in 2050. And this goes beyond, as you can see in the slide, this goes beyond the classical, if I say, very focused climate policy. It addresses air pollution, it addresses circular economy. It builds on a number of values that were enshrined in our treaties. One of them being, let me mention now the one of solidarity. No one has to be left behind, for at least two reasons. One is because solidarity is one of the bases of the European Union. Second, we will not make it if we leave some parts of society outside. It can only be achieved, this growth strategy towards climate neutrality, if everyone is on board. Of course, making this deep transition, economic transition, energy transition needs money, needs investments. This is why I was saying that we are at a crucial moment, because we have to decide on investments for the future now. And so we have to, this we've been working, I'll come back to the monies, but in a sustainable finance strategy with a taxonomy behind, so that we know, investors know in which sort of path they are investing or thinking of investing in the future. This is an important signal for the investors. If we go to the next slide, I will not go into all the details, but remember, we are saying we go to climate neutrality by 2050. And remember, I had shown you some goals for 2030. But unfortunately, if we just do that, we will not reach climate neutrality in 2050. Therefore, this college, the European Commission, led by Ms. van der Leyen, and who has charged Executive Vice President Timmermans to deal with the Green Deal, is let us review our objectives for 2030, and instead of aiming at a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 40%, let us go to 50 or 55% compared to the 1990 levels. And we are working on that, seeing which are the different paths, seeing which might be the different, which will be the different implications, and we will be hopefully having this knowledge base quite complete after the summer. An important aspect with respect to climate change is certainly mitigation is necessary, but we are also working on a revamped adaptation strategy, because as we all know, unfortunately, climate change has already produced effects, will continue producing effects, so we have to adapt to that. If we move to the next slide, I would like to emphasize, and this is very appropriate for today, the international dimension of the Green Deal. The Green Deal is also an invitation for international engagement in a global growth strategy, but still aiming at addressing our climate challenges. And we are doing renewed efforts to embark on climate diplomacy with key G20 countries, of course, including the Russian Federation, to strengthen the momentum and respect the Paris Agreement, everyone together. If we go to the next slide, we are quoting here our Executive Vice President, Mr. Timmermans, And let me read it, because it's very wise what he's saying. If we are going to invest billions in the recovery, in the union, outside the union, by member states, at multi-level level, at multinational level, let us not sink it into an obsolete 20th century fossil-fueled economy that will soon be stranded as assets. But let us invest in a competitive, inclusive, and green economy of the 21st century for jobs and our health. I think this message sums up very much our thinking. We have to aim at the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, because it is only that way that we will be able to address future systemic shocks. And this is an opportunity of this generation. This opportunity, we will not have it later. As we're saying, we are in a hurry, there is urgency, and there has to be smart decisions that in investments that will fix our economies, not only the short term, but also in the longer term. Let me focus with the next slide in the EU recovery plan. Alexa has already referred to it. Just 3 weeks ago, we have the Commission, the European Commission, has presented a historic recovery plan for the European Union, and heads of state are going to discuss it, namely by the end of this week. So there are different components. We are putting forward a renewed budget for 2021-2027, endowed with 1.1 trillion euros. That's the Commission proposal, which we hope will be followed. And a first-of-a-kind facility, given the crisis we are undergoing, a facility called Next Generation EU, endowed with 750 billion euros, which makes a total of 1.85 trillion to help our economy and ensure that we are going back to a growth path, sustainable growth path. This will be given this special, this dedicated first of a kind facility. The Next Generation facility will be awarded with both grants and loans. We can go to the next slide quite quickly, because Alexa already reminded us which are the main sectors where these funds should be, in the European Commission's views, should be targeted, which is building efficiency. We know we have a huge problem with energy efficiency in buildings, and this is something which is very close to the citizen, and this is something which affects the everyday bill of energy of every citizen. We are of course going to invest in deploying clean energy technologies, in designing sustainable and smart transport systems, both public certainly and private, sustainable farming, including organic farming, circular economy. All these are very good business opportunities, and at the same time do have a crucial role in the economic growth of both the whole economy and certainly the private sector. Again, the taxonomy, the European Union taxonomy that we launched months ago, will help also in identifying which are those investments. And let us not forget that the green transition, the green transformation, has to be coupled with the digital transformation. One reinforces the other. The digital is, among others, an enabler of the green technology. The perspectives for the Russian Federation, if you allow me, that be given today's context in the next slide. As you know, in the European Union, we have gradually reduced our demand in fossil fuels, and but despite that, the European Union represents only 7.5% of the world's emissions. So it is clear that going alone does not solve the issue of the problem of the planet. We need everyone on board, and we certainly need the Russian Federation on board, because we have common interests. We have just heard about the terrible events of the permafrost, the fires. So we have to develop together a climate-friendly world with climate-friendly value chains at continental scale. Russia, my understanding that Russia has already developed no regret and low-cost options, which are available immediately, in particular, if I understand well, in energy and resource efficiency. But let us not forget the fantastic assets which represent the Russian forests, and that are a basis for improving our future, because they can deliver roughly around the 30%, according to the estimations we've seen, 30% of the necessary mitigation efforts in a cost-effective way. So there are other opportunities. I don't need to explain that to a Russian audience, but I'd like to highlight that we are well aware that there are sectors like aluminium, steel, and raw materials whose demand will grow in the world, and where the Russian Federation has important investments, progressive investments. And I think it's everybody's interest, because of the weight of the Russian Federation in the economy of the world, in the politics of the world, and also because, as it has just been reminded, unfortunately, the pace at which the temperature grows in the Russian Federation is higher than the rest, quite higher than in the rest of the world, and is causing major distress. Let us remember one thing, the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of action. We cannot allow ourselves not to invest in this, in addressing the climate challenge. The accidents in the Arctic that were referred to, the wild forest fires, and other extreme events, weather events that we are also suffering in other parts of the world, not least in the European Union, show us that we cannot afford not doing anything. We have to do something. Determined, very well determined. In the next slide, I would like to thank the Russian Federation for having accepted the Paris Agreement last year, and having presented in January a national climate change adaptation strategy. We're saying that's very important, and I understand that the Russian Federation is working in a long-term strategy for 2050. So another important message that I would like to leave with you today is that we stand ready to engage with the Russian Federation and provide support to help Russia reap all the benefits of this transformation and the investments in a climate neutral future. And we would like to urge the Russian Federation, as all other our international partners, to place clear and to put in place clear and robust low emission plans in combination with their national recovery strategies. And not least, please, we are open, and we are happy to discuss with you on how you could shape your ambitious long-term strategy for 2050. If we go to the last slides to conclude, I would like to thank again to all of you for being here. I am I'm looking forward very much to listening to the other speakers and the discussions that we will be having, because we are now only 1 or 2 cycles ahead of 2050. We have to take important decisions for our economy, for our business, for our citizens. And the Russian Federation has an incredible amount of assets and can contribute very significantly to this challenge that we all have in this world. So thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, госпожа Делаторе.
Thank you very much, Madam Delatore. There are a lot of questions to you after your presentation, and I would probably ask two of them and leave the rest for the discussion after all the speakers make their presentations. So the most popular question is, when do you expect the European Union finally and officially make a decision on climate neutrality? What year? Can it be postponed because of the positions of certain European countries?
The European Union, the European Council, what we call the European Council, which is the meeting of all the prime ministers or heads of states of the European Union countries. And last December, they corroborated the wish to go to a climate neutrality in 2050. So this is all our policy, all the different legislative pieces, all the investment proposals of the Commission are based on an assumption, on the objective of being climate neutral by 2050. So this is a reality. We are working towards climate neutrality in 2050.
Хорошо, спасибо большое.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer. The next question is, there are a lot of questions regarding the partnership and interaction in the climate sphere between European Union and Russia, but I will probably put these questions till our discussion. Now I would like to ask you EU-specific questions. Here's the question. A lowering of CO2 may cost additional for many factories and productions in general in European Union. How are you planning to outbalance the situation? Maybe there will be some taxes on imported goods from the countries where there are no CO2 restrictions. Are you planning to do some actions regarding the countries that are not planning anyhow to reduce their CO2 emissions?
As you know, I have insisted on that and I will insist on that. The European Union is determined to fight against climate change. And is determined to lead and bring other parts of the world in that same path. So this should not forget, this is our main objective. To do that, we have to do a number of things, among others, investments, which are costly. And we would like to take any necessary measures that would first incentivize the investors and the industry of the European Union to invest in clean technologies, to take a green path, and as well to encourage other parts of the world of doing the same. And to do that, we are thinking of the so-called carbon border adjustment. You know, there are analysis in preparation. But let us remind ourselves, what is the main purpose? When this mechanism will be designed and put in place? It is not a protection of the European market, not at all. It is a way of preserving the climate friendliness of our economy and making sure that everything that gets into our economy is as climate friendly as European Union produced products. So it's and for that our president has said that we will be consulting our trade partners. So public consultations will be issued, will be launched, so that each actor, not only in the European Union, but also outside the European Union, will be telling us how we could do that, what are the measures that other countries would be taking. If everyone, I mean, we would be very pleased not to have the need to put such mechanisms if the whole world had the same climate standards, let us say. 1 second about the costliness. Indeed, some investments are costly. But let me remind you one thing. Studies show that not investing is in the mid and long term much more costly than investing a little bit more now. So the cost benefit analysis shows that not only it is not a zero game, it's a winning game for those investing in clean technologies and in clean economies. Let me just reassure every one of us that the European Union is a member of the World Trade Organization and is, of course, honoring all the commitments and all the rules that govern that organization. It goes without saying, but I'd rather remind it ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your clarification. There are a lot of questions, but we put them off till later discussion. Now we move to our second speaker. And before I do this, some technical remarks. Again, all your questions go to questions and answers. And as we have the second speaker already, please specify who is the addressee of your question. It will be easier for us to sort out your questions. Thank you. So now I give the floor to Evgeny Nikitin, CEO of Rusal. He represents the Russian business, and he will tell you what the Russian business expects from the Green Deal. How does his company prepare for its realization and what it plans to do? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this wonderful webinar. I would like to thank all the participants of our webinar. I think this topic will be vital for many years in a row, and I thank the organizers for the invitation to take part in the discussion. The topic of European Green Deal is vital for us as a company. We would all like to understand better what is the climate strategy of our partners, how its implementation will affect our trading, technological exchanges, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities and the challenges in regards of financing this process. I'm also grateful to our mother company, LM Plus. We develop our business jointly with the energy business, and we achieve the results that are leading us to very good performance in the aluminum production. Now, as for Rusal, which is one of the global leaders in aluminum production, I would like to emphasize that within the context of the crisis caused by COVID-19, we should try to establish general and common vision of approaches to our cooperation in the sphere of the strategic supply chains for aluminum production. COVID disrupted a lot of these supply chains, which are currently almost recovered, and we have to figure out the mechanisms to overcome these difficulties in the future. Also, we will only win if the Green Deal is coming hand in hand with liberalization of the lower carbon trading and will not be an additional burden for the consumers. So in this connection, we are very much interested in public consultations organized by European Commission, especially in for the mechanisms of the low carbon regulations. Rusal took part in the first round of these consultations, and we are ready to participate in the following discussions. I would like to express my gratitude to European Commission for the invitation in these discussions, and we are ready to cooperate in this discussion and to clear the situation regarding the strategy. At present, about 75% of the European demand for the prime aluminum is covered due to the imports. And Rusal satisfies about 20% of the growing demand of the European Union of the prime aluminum, which is further processed in the territory of the European Union. And of course, the sector here, which is small and medium-sized enterprises, giving employment to over 200,000 employees. We welcome the statement by European Commission regarding the carbon border adjustment mechanism cooperation, and of course, SBMM should be based on international developed and recognized classification and certification of the carbon footprint. We also think that it is time to update and maybe make it to the zero, the duties for the products with lower carbon contents. And it's very important to do this within the framework of the Green Deal along the entire production chain. And of course, along the entire consumer chain, independently of the country, of the location of the consumer. As a company, Rusal efficiently realizes its own climate strategy, and we control our carbon footprint for our products. We support decarbonization of our industry in general. More than 90% of our needs in electricity is covered on the basis of renewable energy sources. Our goal is to lift this 90% to 99% to further lower the carbon footprint. Rusal is one of the leading producers of the low carbon aluminum in the world. And we focus on our own technologies that are lessening the effect of our production on the environment. In the year 2017, we announced a launch of a new brand, low carbon aluminum, which is called LLAO. And the emission is no more than 4 tons of CO2 per 1 ton of aluminum. At present, the share of this aluminum is 77%, and we're planning to increase this share. And we would like to get to even lower levels of CO2 emission for the ton of prime aluminum. Naturally, European Green Deal can be viewed as an incentive for cooperation in the sphere of research to provide low carbon approach and carbon neutrality. One of the projects, flagship projects of Rusal, in the sphere of technologies is the technology of inert anode. We have recently started testing the prototype of industrial electrolyzer with inert anode. And this approach has a lot of principally new technical advantages. And we can reduce the carbon footprint down to 2 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum. We're also developing and implementing other promising technologies that will be very favorable for the environment and climate in general. I would be ready to dwell upon them in the questions and answers sessions. To compensate the emission of greenhouse gases, of course, we understand we cannot reduce them to zero, but to compensate such emission, the company has its own program. We have a program to compensate our carbon footprint. And one of these actions is to develop forests in Russia. In particular, in 2019, within the framework of realization of our climate strategy, Rusal planted over 1 million trees in the territory of Russia, mostly in Siberia. This was in 2019. This is the first step in our country of that level and scope to recover forests and to reduce and compensate for the carbon footprint. We also have works to protect forests from fires. In the lower Yenisei forest area, the area of over 500,000 hectares, we realized this program, which allows this area to minimize the level of fires and illegal cutting of forest, deforestation. We also like to support these actions because we need to preserve our forests in Russia for future generations for many years ahead. Also, I would like to mention the fact that Rusal supports the development of environmental projects. This year, we opened a grant-based competition for the best solutions in the spheres of ecology, environment that can be practically realized in the near future. And we will realize these ideas in our company. I'm done. Thank you for your attention. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Nikitin. There are several questions for you, and I will ask all of them which apply to the company itself. You mentioned that Rusal has certain technological developments. What technologies are used to lower the burden on the environment? As I said, of course, the most promising technologies are inert anode. It's an absolutely no technology. That's a technology of producing aluminum and generating oxygen at the same time. And I hope that we will succeed in developing this technology. We also, at all our enterprises, we modernize gas purification equipment. It's a two-step gas purification. It's dry gas purification. It takes dust and fluoride from gas. Another step is to purify the emitted gas from serum. So within 7 years from now, this technology will be implemented at all our enterprises. All our new capacities will be using this new anode technology. And this is our proprietary technology. There's powerful electrolyzers with minimal exhausts, the lowest in the world. This technology allows us to have the lowest emissions for this kind of production in the world. Thank you. And the second question. You mentioned that 90% is covered by of your energy consumption is covered by the hydro power station. One of our webinar participants says that it's not 100% environmental friendly energy production. Are you planning to switch to other sources of? Are you talking about the emission to the environment? We publish our reports on sustainable development, and they are openly available. You can get all the information about our emission, detailed information. Now, as for the, what was the question again, please? That's using the hydro energy. Of course, there is a certain damage to the environment, but not as comparable to the coal burning technology. Why are you building our strategy on hydropower? And all our major plants are in Siberia. We have only 2 plants, smaller plants, in the European part of Russia. So most of the production is located in Siberia. And we know that most power in Siberia comes from hydro resources. So we are not using coal industry. Hydro industry, energy is our priority, as there is no alternative in Siberia. No alternative to hydro energy. We also develop solar energy. We have this in our strategic plans. And naturally, when we start building new plants, and we have already solar power stations in Russia, we have already signed one agreement to get supplies from solar power energy for our production. And when we will be expanding our capacities in Siberia and in European part of Russia, we will be using solar energy and wind energy as well. We are not planning to sign other agreements other than wind and solar in the future. Thank you very much. We are moving further. So I'm calling all on our speaker. Please stick to the timing. Now give the floor to Johan Flatze, President of Schneider Electric Russia CIS, Chairman of European Business Russia Association. How does the European business in Russia react to the Green Deal, and what is the outlook? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to make also my small contribution to a topic which is of high interest for European business active in Russia itself. Let me share maybe a presentation with the audience, which is going to kind of pass the messages. I hope you see it. All right. Sorry. Full screen. There we go. So yeah, first of all, fully agreeing with the speakers that climate change in Russia is a big issue. Although I do speak that I'm preaching for the choir, people which are attending this webinar per definition are people which are interested in this particular topic, and they know how important it is. As you mentioned, climate change in Russia, which is 2.5 times higher than the worldwide average, in the Arctic region, indeed, an even more difficult situation with an average of 4 times the worldwide average. Now, when you look, however, in how climate change is being looked at Russia, I think, first of all, we need to be fair to say that until today, I cannot really say that climate change is among the top public policy priorities, neither on the federal level nor on the regional level. It is getting there, but I do think as well that vested interest of export of hydrocarbon are also playing a role here on that particular level. If you talk about the corporate interest, yes, indeed, from corporation, and this is what I see when I'm interacting with those people, interest in reducing carbon footprint is gradually increasing. But far from all companies are as advanced as Rusal that we have here just listened to. And typically, what I also noticed is that those kind of big corporations that are interested in the topic are very often companies which also have a listing outside, a stock listing outside of Russia. So there is some pressure from global shareholders to do something about that. But in many cases, when I talk to Russian companies, again, it's not really a priority. And lastly, also on the Russian population side, there was a survey done last year, and only 20% of the Russian overall population is really believing that climate change is a very important topic. So the kind of mass grassroots events and awareness that we have seen with last year big demonstrations in Paris, London, Brussels, you name it, by the youth. That's a thing that I think we have to be fair to say is still rather absent here. And it's a pity because, as you see on the chart, it's a real issue. June the 9th, just a couple of weeks ago, the hottest place in Europe and Northern Africa on that day was the Arctic region. It was not Madrid, it was not Casablanca. The hottest spot on the earth was the Arctic Circle. Now, if you talk about how come that this perception maybe is not yet fully there, and that's the thing that I also notice when I talk to quite some people in the broader public. Often, still today, there are people who say, look, Russia, we live in a cold country with very long winters. Maybe it's not so bad after all to have a little bit a warmer climate. And people even point out to certain of the advantages, if I can call it like that. Especially the first one is a bit ironic. The fact that thanks to climate change, there is no possibility to navigate ice-free over the Arctic Ocean, again, transporting hydrocarbons. I find that always very ironic. But indeed, yeah, maybe some increased crop production or warmer winters, which in its turn then would reduce during the winter the energy consumption. So this is sometimes being pitched. But I do agree fully with Ms. De La Torre that, of course, by far, the cost of climate change is outweighing any possible perceived advantage that it could have. With a number of examples. I think some people remember the heat wave, to pick this one, the heat wave that we had in Moscow and the central region back in 2010. That heat wave alone caused over 55,000 people to die. 55,000 people died in Moscow central region during one hot summer. People don't talk about that anymore. We talk about, indeed, the fatality of COVID, which is terrible, and I'm not downplaying it. But thanks God, the fatality of COVID, it's a fraction of the fatality that we just had in one hot summer, which is caused by climate change in Russia. There are other things that were mentioned, forest fires in Siberia, flooding in the Irkutsk region. Yes, indeed, the Norilsk nickel disaster, where you have diesel tanks, which were based on permafrost subsoil melting. They collapsed 20,000 ton of diesel being released or spilled into a river. And if you think it over, that you have in Russia over 150,000 kilometers of gas pipelines and more than 50,000 kilometers of oil pipelines running through the country. Thousands of those pipelines are often very, very close to rivers, and many of those gas pipelines are based on permafrost. I hope Norilsk Nickel is going to be an exception, but I do believe that I will not be surprised if in the coming years we will see breakages of pipelines, which would cause tremendous costs. Yeah, if you look in other damages in overall infrastructure, like in Yakutsk, for instance, the permafrost region per definition, you're having buildings which are crumbling because of the fact, indeed, that the pillars are embedded in permafrost subsoil. They're melting. It is causing huge damages. And then I don't even speak about the fact that you have additional greenhouse gas emissions which are now released because indeed the subsoil is melting. So it is a huge issue that we are having. And again, back to my point, is it a priority on the federal level? I mean, I will be blunt. I'm not really sure because in late March, Russia has released, as you know, its long-term strategy for reducing CO2 emissions by 2050, the same magic year that we talk about in Brussels. And indeed, yes, basic scenario, we will reduce by 36% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels. But people, so you say, whoa, it's a substantial reduction. But people forget to say that 1990 was very high, and then because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emission dropped. So a so-called reduction of, according to that new draft policy of CO2 emissions compared to 1990 is in reality a high increase of further CO2 emissions compared to where we are today. I mean, and today should be the benchmark, not the past should be the benchmark. And I know that we are talking about some compensations with forestation, etc., etc. I know all that, but I am lacking ambition here. And the country is having challenges for sure, but I also agree there are opportunities connected to that. I mean, challenges are, I oversimplify it a little bit, but Russia is today the world's absolute leader of carbon export. This is the green box at the far end that you see. It's the world absolute export leader for two reasons. Export, 65% of Russian export or oil and gas and coal energy sources. And quite a number of the other exports that the country are doing are what we would call energy intensive products, products which are produced by using a lot of energy. Yeah. And now we have two challenges, right? I mean, we do know that the EU is aiming for climate neutrality by 2050, and that is impossible with the current level of oil or gas fossil fuel consumption. Yeah. So hence, indeed, the Energiewende in Germany, the push for wind, solar, renewable energy. But per definition, it also means that one of the main sources of income of Russia over the years will decrease, speaks by itself. Yeah. And that in a country which by and large is not really that diversified. We talk a lot about diversification, and I think some progress is being made. But the country has a challenge if they will be stuck in the past thinking. How will there be a modern economy in the years ahead? And then indeed, I think another challenge, but opportunity, is what was talked about, the ideas of the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I'm back to my energy intensive products, whereby, okay, we have to see how will it fit with WTO regulations. And I do know some Russian people, policymakers say it's hidden protectionism. Yeah? I mean, we have to work on that, explain this is not the case. But unless, of course, those industries are going to modernize this production, they will have a problem as well. And again, Rusal is doing a fantastic job, but it's more an exception than a rule. So moving forward, I know I have little time. How should it be done? I think indeed I liked when Ms. de la Torre was saying there is no vaccine against climate change. It's not like COVID, but there is one thing which COVID and climate change has in common. I mean, there are no boundaries. Yeah, it will not stop at the border, and that's why I think the case of cooperating between Russia and the EU, the big neighbors, is higher than ever. And I do believe that it is also an opportunity because the technology is advancing, thanks God. Yeah, and it's not just about electrical vehicles, revolution launched by Tesla, which is now mainstream in the overall car industry. I think we do see an acceleration towards a world which is more digital, which will be much more electric in the future as well. We need to focus, it was mentioned, not only, and that's the thing that I'm sometimes missing in the debate, not only about the generation of energy, but also more about the consumption about energy, especially in Russia. Generation of energy, we know about wind, solar, renewable sources of energy. Generation, I think few people realize that 40% of the CO2 emissions are coming from buildings. It's coming from buildings. Sometimes people say the war on climate change will be won or lost in the big cities, and that's absolutely true. The EU is indeed way advanced in imposing energy efficient measures on buildings, which we do not see in Russia. I mean, for the anecdote, when I arrived first time in Russia a long time ago, it was during a warm fall. Central heating in Moscow, the apartments are being heated. The way that apartments were cooled off is by we open the windows. So at the same time we heat and we cool by opening the windows. And even still today, you do see a lot of that behavior. So I also think that quite frankly, there the regulator can step up in insisting stronger energy efficiency measures on bigger buildings or buildings as a whole. And technologies are allowing that. And as always with the revolution, if it's just going to be top down, it will not really work. It also makes economic sense. The cases are there and proven that by investing in digital equipment, in automation, in building management systems, you can substantially reduce the energy consumption. You can make the comfort of working even more higher. So it is something that speaks for itself, but it has to be done. It has to be done. And then also a green and smart industry, smart plants. My time is running out, but I do have, and I will be happy afterwards, so online, offline, to share more details. But these last 3 slides are more in detail what we talk about, moving towards an electric and a digital world with more data, with more software, with more analytics. It can bring amazing results. The decarbonization and the connected buildings, just to share with the latest technologies that in many cases, European companies, many of them members of the Association of European Business, are having in their portfolio, which we can indeed deliver in partnership with our Russian partners, industrial partners, but also end users. So the technologies do exist. Would be good if we can have a stronger push to from the regulatory to get them introduced. And indeed, a green smart industry, that's more a corporate slide that I just pulled up. But smart manufacturing is a thing that we are doing and rolling out in our plants worldwide. It's bringing efficiency, it's bringing much more productivity, and it's indeed also tackling what I call then the consumption part of the story. So my last slide, then I will take some questions. I think Russia is on a crossroad. I think Russia can continue its current policy, which is not looking forward. I think if the country is doing that, okay, maybe short term they will muddle through. They will miss a fantastic opportunity to modernize, diversify. They will have tremendous cost as well because of the fact that, as I said, it's super real, the opportunity. So to move together in a global climate unity approach, hand in hand, I think is critically important, and that's why we at the Association of European Business, we're very supportive of this webinar, and all the actions that the European Commission is taking, but clearly as well the outreach that the European Union is doing with their Russian counterparts. So thank you.
Спасибо большое за выступление.
Thank you for your presentation. Here's the question for you. What is your opinion regarding all these topics? Does the Russian business recognize all this problem? And do you see any changes in the understanding of visioning of these problems by the Russian business?
As I was mentioning, I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer to that. You have companies which are absolutely advanced. Often these are companies which are also having a much more proper corporate governance, a functioning board of directors which is realizing and thinking ahead of the curve. And as I was mentioned, often as well, it happens to be companies which are listed, because on top of that, you then have the pressure from the shareholders. But you do have a lot of other companies, which I said, are not really looking into this issue as a core belief, because they think it is adding up cost, etc., etc. But mind you, we also have responsibility. We as business, we also have to pitch the case not just from an ecological angle, but from an economical angle, that it does make sense. Because I mean, it's probably often the only way to make it work. I think personally, why is a Tesla car really taking off, an electrical car? Is it because of the fact that it is based on electricity? I don't think so. It is because it is a design which is looking good, which is going from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 4 seconds, which is giving a completely different experience to the driver. So the consumer wanted it, and that is why it really took off. It's not because it's used on electricity, quite frankly. The consumer wanted it. And I think here we as business, we also have a responsibility to go to our customers and say, if you want to be a market leader, if you want to be more efficient, if you want to be able to compete on the global market, this is what you need to do, and that's going to be the results in efficiency savings, in energy savings that you will generate, and we can do that. So I think, quite frankly, we as business, we are still too much talking about the technology per se, without pitching what does it mean on the efficiency side. So this is actually my answer.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое за ответ.
Thank you for your answer. There are other questions, and I will leave them for our overall discussion. We move on with our presentations. Please stay with us. And now I give the virtual microphone to our next speaker, Alexei Kokorin, Head of Climate and Energy Program, World Wildlife Fund, Russia, WWF, Russia. He will tell us about the climate policy here in Russia and what is planned for the future. Alexei, floor is yours.
Большое спасибо. Меня слышно?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I'm not a businessman and I'm not a government official. I represent a civil society here. So I will try to cover the situation from the viewpoint of the civil situation. And I think it will be quite critical and not too pleasant to hear. So how can we view the implementation of the Paris Agreement? Well, financing is okay, good progress is going on, adaptation, also great progress in business associations and cities, but there is no progress in emission of greenhouse gases. No major countries follow the path of the Paris Agreement. We're talking about 3.5 degrees centigrade. So, of course, this is totally unacceptable, and the European Union must be the leader in this movement in improving the situation. Now, what about Russia? The situation has improved compared to what it was 10 years ago. Of course, there is a reduction of demand for our energy resources, and hence the government tries to be more efficient in utilizing the energy resources. But still, we are not discussing reduction of greenhouse gases emission here and now. The Russian situation is in the wait-and-see position. We are wait-and-see position, saying we still wait till the partner tells us we will not trade with you until and unless you reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. So this is a very doubtful tactic. Recently, there was a report prepared by Skolkova, and this report shows that the tactic of wait and see and then catch up is a bad tactic here. We should move hand in hand, leg in leg together on this way. But what can be done for Russia to move with the same pace as European Union? First of all, the European Green Deal should send a strong financial signal to Russia that there will be a severe punishment for non-reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, there are a lot of tricks here, but what can be considered as a gap, as a whole? If there is a mutual settlements, not real money, for instance, in Article 6.2, well, it means nothing, it's nothing, then the civil society will be thinking how to change the situation. But secondly, the Green Deal signal must be very, very positive and oriented in favor of diversification of Russian economy. It should not be a pressure from the outside. It should be a cooperation showing the incentive for the country to develop in a proper way, in a Green Deal way. Now, let's look at what can be done. The first lesson is that the only way, the only approach for a major country to reduce the emissions is not to pressure on it, but to make Russia or any other major country understand that the growing temperature is not acceptable. When the European Union said that 1.2 or 2 degrees is more acceptable than 3 degrees, and 3 degrees is totally unacceptable, then the European Union started moving in the proper direction. So Russia must recognize the same. All the actions should be synchronized. The Paris Agreement is a framework agreement. It's too weak to solve this problem. It should be bilateral relations between the European Union and Russia, and the agreement should be stricter than the Paris Agreement. Also, as a non-government organization representative, I would say that the citizens should volunteer to participate in this process. People are more active in their volunteer actions when they feel it in their pockets, in their personal finances. So if somebody buys something, pays X rubles, But if this is not only X rubles for a particular item, but also X item plus a fine or penalty for excessive emission, then the people will feel that they are paying more for not so environmental friendly commodities or goods. So if all people of Russia and the European Union as well vote with their wallets, then it will move from the dead point. Thank you, Alexei. Here's a question to you as a representative of a public organization that works with mass media and with people. So all these questions that you've raised, global climatic issues, the green recovery of the economy, are people aware of all this process? Are these questions and matters discussed in Russia? Are they important for Russians? Yes. Of course, these matters are important, and of course people are discussing them. But how people discuss them in Europe and how they discuss them in Russia. Of course, in Europe, the discussion is much more active. But if we compare the situation in Russia now to what it was 10 years ago, of course, Russia is much more actively discussing the climate issue. And people are recognizing better and better that they should act, and they should act now. So people are trying to adapt to the changing situation. But the percentage of people who believe that this is because of the human factor is growing. So if we move in this direction, we will achieve real good and impressive results. Thank you, Alexei. Thank you. Dear friends, we have done with the presentations, the part that is dedicated to the presentations, but we have quite a comment from the expert who joined us recently. We learned that he wants to express his opinion. Now I would like to give the floor to Cesare Maria Regarini, who would like to make a brief remark regarding our discussion regarding the green finances in Russia and what is the future of the green financing sector in Russia. Why it is so important for the development of interaction between Russia and Europe, especially along the Green Deal. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion, very interesting discussion. And I particularly thank the EU delegation in Moscow. I will be extremely brief, and I will go straight to the point of the question of our webinar about the Green Deal and its relevance to Russia. I think that the Green Deal is probably the biggest effort till now in the world toward a real decarbonization, both of the economy and at large of the society, which also makes the European Union the leader in this topic. The seriousness of the European Union commitment, I think, lays on two factors. The first one, of course, is the size of financing, which is envisaged for the next years. And the second element, which is also extremely important, is the increase in awareness of public opinions of member states and of the companies. The first are worried about the future of the planet and of the well-being of the next generations. And the second have finally realized that, among other things, to invest in green projects and sustainable development is also a very profitable business. So the combination of these factors should induce people and countries and the international organization that the European Union is very serious in this topic. And the Green Deal, of course, is relevant to Russia. If even by 2050, the 80% of the plans made by European Union decarbonization will be true, it means that in the mid-long term, there will be a drastic reduction of importing of gas and oil from Russia. So in front of this situation, I think, first of all, we should not make, or we should avoid some mistakes. In my opinion, we have to avoid to reducing or eliminating the energy interdependence, gas versus money. So first of all, we have to negotiate and to arrive to a deal about that, because otherwise we will have evident negative consequence also on the stability of the continent. And we must always keep in mind the cost of the failure. So in my opinion, and it's my suggestion, that both entities, Russia and European Union, should start as soon as possible, and despite the present political difficulties, a real strategic dialogue on energy to enhance what unites us rather than what divides us. This kind of strategic dialogue on energy may lead to a review of this interdependency, which could be this time based, for instance, on the production of clean energy. And given the normal size and scope of what is necessary to do, a lot of financial and technological cooperation would take place between Russia and the European Union. And finally, as has been recalled during the conversation, the presentations, Russia is part of the Paris Agreement and is committed to its provision. And climate change and environment protection is one of the areas of global cooperation, since it is an unprecedented challenge, global challenge. And this could be another area of strong and deep cooperation with European Union and Russia. Today, Russia, even through the WebRF, which is the focus point and the forefront, is developing a new green market. It is preparing green and sustainable development projects. It is aligning its guidelines to international standards. We prepare the issuance of green bonds, which, by the way, became an essential instrument to implement policies for climate change action. And the point of the real point, the sore point of this scheme is, of course, the free access to international capital market. And I'm sure that the European Union, leading today the global action on climate change and protection of environment, will be sensitive enough for a common activity in this field. So let's try, at least once in a while, to display a real strategic long-term vision for our relations. So I was trying to be brief.
Спасибо большое, господин Рогалини, за...
Thank you for your comment. Dear friends, we have some time for a discussion. I've looked through the questions that we have received starting from the beginning of our webinar, and we have chosen, with the help of my colleagues, the questions that received the highest support. I want to tell you right away that our experts have already answered some of the questions in the chat, so they're available for your attention. Also, we start with the questions. For instance, the question regarding the cooperation in the sphere of climate protection between Russia and European Union. So what would be the format of climate partnership? What would be the most feasible and realizable? Would it be a specific projects of cooperation? Would it be framework agreement, which is similar to energy dialogue, informal meetings. So what is the format of cooperation to be most efficient nowadays? So, dear speakers, who would volunteer? Madam Delator, would you like to say?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure my colleagues in the EU delegation will also have their views. As far as I'm concerned, I think the important thing, we've been discussing this morning plenty of issues which are of common interest in the climate realm. So I would not put priority on which are the formalities, the processes to do that. Is let us work together. And in climate, as I was saying, a pity we didn't have the conference, but I think we have a lot of collaboration and we can reinforce it. For example, when we are doing modeling, which is underpinning the scenarios which we are both parties preparing and which will shape future policy. We can cooperate in science. You know that we have already a framework program for science and technology, and there are many different actions, but namely those on clean technologies and on materials on which it is already possible to cooperate. I understand that you are building your mechanisms. In Russia, the Russian Federation is building the mechanisms for monitoring the emissions, for registering them. In Europe, in the European Union, we have quite a good expertise on that because we have long experience on that. We are happy to share that experience. So I think it's by talking about the issues of common interest and common need, as we've heard this morning. I would not go further in the process, which is, I think, in my mind at this stage, perhaps secondary. But I don't know whether Alexa has something different to say.
Angelina, if you allow me, I can maybe add to what has been said by Clara very well. I think that we are now not in the stage of discussing formal ways of how to cooperate and discuss and so on, but rather to see how we can cooperate on a level of companies, of businesses, NGOs. There are a number of project activities that are being financed and actually put on call also for Russian companies or Russian non-governmental organizations that can be also found, and where the Russian participants can join in and participate on this, let's say, working level type of activities. In terms of dialogue on the Russia-EU, indeed 2014 has changed a lot. There was quite an active dialogue before, and then in 2014 political dialogue ends. But that does not mean that we don't both find common areas of interest, and we discuss it, as Clara mentioned. We see who are our interlocutors here, and we have some of them here among the speakers, but we are also having in the presidential administration, in the government Ministry of Environmental Environment. So we are actually having dialogue and discussions there, and we see what are the practical ways of implementation rather than declaratory or agreement type of ways at this particular stage.
Спасибо. Так,
Thank you. Any volunteers from the Russian side, the Russian speakers, please? What sectors or segments of agreement and cooperation that would be of the most interest for Russia? What would be mostly supported here in Russia? I would say we cannot focus on a certain single instrument of cooperation or communications. All of them are important at the government level, at the level of businesses. Personal relationships are also very important, and they're very important in Russia. So we have a Russian saying that the water doesn't work on the rock that doesn't move. So that's a Russian saying, meaning that all efforts are good to move forward. So if we focus on one instrument, we can miss something which is more important. Thank you. A rolling stone gathers no moss. Yes. Mr. Regalini.
Yes, well, first of all, I'm sure that nobody will miss the importance of the energy dialogue, which goes well beyond the only economic aspect. As far as climate change and protection of environment, I believe that there are a so large scope of discussion, and especially also taking advantage from Russia of the experience that the European Union has been accumulating during these decades. It is important. I think that, you know, Russia is a very industrialized country, and at the same time is a very polluting country. And it's the most important neighbor that the European Union has on the continent. So reciprocal efforts in improving the climate change actions will benefit both. And on the basis of this, I think that the structural dialogue also in climate change and protection of environment will be needed. Also because Russia will need financial support and technological support. And that's why the entire exercise, the energy dialogue and the dialogue on climate change and protection of environment has also some political aspects that nobody should miss.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Now, friends, we have quite a number of questions in the chat that are referring to the border mechanisms regarding carbon. Is there a timeline for their introduction? Can we discuss them in greater detail?
Хочет ли кто-то из экспертов выступить на эту тему?
Can one of the experts clarify on this? This is regarding border adjustment mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism. A related question is whether there are any plans to connect and how to connect or establish coordination, the European system of trading dismissals, EDS system, and include the Russians in the trading of emissions system, to include the Russian enterprises there.
Да, пожалуйста, госпожа Делла Торре.
Yes, you're welcome, please.
Thank you very much. Indeed, our system of EDS, emission trading system, which, as I was saying, covers 40% of our emissions. We have said that we are prepared. We're looking forward to linking, associating our system to systems which are mature enough or that are linkable to our system. We are in discussions with several parts of the world, but except the linkage with Switzerland, which has come in force quite recently, it's true that it's the size of the market is not comparable to the one of the European Union or the Russian Federation. So there is openness, and this can be another field in which we could exchange experience, see how it works, You know that next year in the work program of the European Commission, it is foreseen to prepare an amendment of the directives which are underlying that system. So we are always open to discuss and share experience and see how we can, because at the end of the day, what we want is to have in the world economy, the price of the carbon would be more meaningful than the price of the oil. That's our aim. We can dream, and I hope that one day our dream will come true. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, госпожа де ла Торре.
Thank you, Madam de la Torre. Alexei Kokorin, I see you're volunteering to say a word. We cannot hear you. Please turn on your... Yes, now. Yes. Now we can hear you. From the viewpoint of the civil society, it is not really important what kind of tax is being imposed, but it's important to know where the money will go to and for. The money gathered from this tax. It's not important how the people give their money. It's important to understand which way they go, which way it goes. So if we understand that the money goes to the budget of the European Union, people will not support this. But if they understand that the money goes to environmental protection, then yes, they will support this. Thank you, Alexei. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I see that there are a lot of questions left unanswered. Questions, comments. Thank you for being active, for your interest, but unfortunately, and I'm telling this to our attendees, but our speakers are limited in time. I would like to thank our speakers, our attendees, the Association of European Business, European Delegation in Russia, thanks to translators and tech support. I think it was an interesting event that we all enjoyed. We managed to express our opinions, positions. We listened to different positions and opinions from the European Union, from the Russian business, from the civil society, and we see that there is an enormous interest in this subject matter. So on my behalf, I hope that this is just the first discussion in a long row of follow-up discussion on this matter for us to move forward. So hopefully we will meet in reality also, but we will continue to communicate via the internet. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.